Yeah, of course, always. Oh, description. Trita, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, man, good. All right, so where are we?
I mean,
What do you
there's a
make of
word
what's
for it I
happening?
can't say on air, but yeah, you can
What can you
imagine
say
what
on
it is.
air?
What I can say on air is that, look, I think it's becoming increasingly clear that this is not likely to have a huge bite on the Iranians. It will create problems. It will make cost greater in terms of additional sanctions. I'm not convinced, however, that it is designed to really bring down the regime or to force them to capitulate, even though that is the way it's being presented. I think there may be a calculation behind this in which this gives the impression that the edge is with the US, that the leverage is with the US, but the aim is to have a more stable situation with no further escalation or de-escalation up until the midterms. And then after the midterms, the situation may be different. But the idea that right now there would be something that is done that really will bite with the Iranians, I think the administration understands that will only cause the Iranians to counter-escalate. And that counter-escalation is likely going to be more problematic for the United States. Particularly mindful of the fact that the US view is, not the exaggerated view that you hear in the media, but the US view is that thanks to the use of VLCCs, these massive tankers that can take up to 2 million barrels of oil a day, you only need about 5 of them a day to be able to get half of the traffic of the Strait as it was pre-war. You take out the fact that the Chinese have already reduced 5 million barrels of consumption a day, and then you only have a delta of about 5, and most of that 5 is covered by oil going through the Saudi and the Emirati pipelines. I'm not saying that the administration truly believes that they're there yet, but they believe that they have a pathway to it that dramatically reduces the economic impact of the strait being closed. Under those circumstances, it does not make sense to do something that compels the Iranians to counter-escalate. Moreover, just setting that aside for a moment, to get that type of a bite, you're not going to get it unless you go after the Chinese. And I just don't see the administration really doing that. I mean, I think we talked about it before. The reason why oil never went up above 150, 200, is because the Chinese dramatically reduced their consumption. And they did so deliberately, not to help the US, not to screw over the Iranians, but because their interest, which is what they pursue, is to make sure that there wasn't any global economic recession. So they reduced their demand in order to keep oil prices down and make sure that the rest of the global economy didn't collapse. So if the US goes after the Chinese can do a tremendous amount to screw over Trump, particularly mindful of the fact that Xi is about to come over here for a visit. So I find it very unlikely that they're going to go after the Chinese, which then means that this is by design not really meant to really unsettle the apple cart, but I think to just get to a new status quo that keeps it this way up until the election. The question then is, what will the Iranians do? Because if they understand that this is just some sort of a temporary period and afterwards Trump may have greater maneuverability to do much more difficult things against Iran, I suspect that their calculation right now is they want to see if there's still a chance of getting Trump back into the MOU. As you heard, today the Iranians and the Omanis agreed on an arrangement for the Strait. And I think right now the momentum is with waiting and seeing if Trump is willing to come back in. If that doesn't happen, there's no reason for the Iranians to counter-escalate right now. They'll counter-escalate either if there is a real bite to these things, and we don't know that for some time. And secondly, if they realize that the trajectory is negative for Iran, and as a result, if this just continues for a long period of time, they will be in a worse situation. But even then, you don't do it now. You do it 2 weeks, 3 weeks before the midterms, right? Yeah. That's when the impact of an Iranian counter-escalation is the greatest. So the absence of a response right now, I don't think should be read into too much. I think if there will be a counter-escalation, the timing of it most likely would not be until a little bit later.
That's a good point. unless they do it now. Okay, there's some updates here. Unless they do it now as a warning to the US, like some limited strike to make sure the US don't make the sanctions bite. Just an
Yeah.
assumption. But I like
So,
your thinking's better. That's why I said to Professor.
the Iranians have been actually quite effective or astute in terms of calibrating how they respond. And sometimes it's gone too far, perhaps beyond what they themselves wanted to. But there's been plenty of options that they've done in which they can do something without necessarily causing a major escalation. And again, I'm not saying that they won't. I'm just saying there's circumstances under which they would, but even then the timing doesn't make sense for them to do it right away.
All right, so there's a few things just happened as you're speaking, and there's something that happened earlier today. So Asim Munir was in Iran, and according to Al Arabiya, he was there to make an offer from the Americans, where the Americans would lift sanctions, lift their blockade in return for Iran letting ships go through without a fee. So while these sanctions are happening, according to Al Arabiya, an offer is being made to the Iranians. Tasnim also reported that Asim Munir was there, the head of Pakistan, was in Iran to not to make threats, but to deliver a message in terms of negotiations. So it's kind of aligned with the Al Arabiya report. So that was earlier today. And there's also the news that the Omanis and the Iranians put out a joint statement saying they're close to a deal on the Strait of Hormuz, where reportedly, that wasn't in the statement, but reportedly Iran would, we've talked about it before, through the Irani corridor, ships would go in and Iran would charge a fee, and through the Omani corridor, Iran would not charge a fee. And while you're speaking, just something came in, I haven't read it yet. Oman's Foreign Minister Badr Abu Saidi said he hopes a temporary corridor through the Strait of Hormuz and practical arrangements to restore safe navigation will be announced soon. He added that the future management of the strait and a permanent solution will be addressed later under Article 5 of the Islamabad MOU. Oman also... Is that saying they're going to be putting in a fee, I guess? Oman also plans to hold discussions with regional partners to promote peace, blah, 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 blah. And then the Iranian foreign minister just said on the discussions with Oman on TV just now, yes, look, first I should point out that the Strait of Hormuz has no more than two coastal countries, Iran and Oman. And the respected viewers are aware that prior to our recent wars, we had no problem in the Strait of Hormuz. Traffic was normal. Iran did not have a special focus on the Strait of Hormuz issues as it should have, and our focus was on other areas in strategic military and security discussions. But especially after the 40-day war, our attention was drawn to this issue. It is true that we have two coastal countries, but we are still in a state of war. Okay, he didn't give anything, so that was useless. But Asim Munir and the statement by Iran and Oman.
Okay, so first on what the Pakistanis said, there's been different reporting. My understanding is that there wasn't an offer to lift the blockade simultaneously, meaning that the American side wanted first measures by the Iranians in terms of opening the strait, and then later there would be a lifting of the blockade. So it's not that they're disagreeing on what needs to be done, there's a disagreement on the sequencing. And that the Iranians are rejecting the idea that they're going to give up their main leverage in return for delayed reciprocity by Trump, who they completely distrust. And the message back to the Pakistanis was on this issue. I nevertheless think that that is a resolvable issue. You can still, because it doesn't seem to me that the US side is saying that, they first need to see a long period of time of implementation before they would lift the blockade. I think this mainly likely is that Trump want to be able to say the Iranians gave the first concession. This was something that in the JCPOA took a very long time, in which it was critical, and sequencing was being made, in which on most of the time the Iranians took the first step, but the reciprocal step was very fast done by the US side. So ultimately, it really didn't matter. It's just a prestige thing, essentially. So I think that is... You don't trust Trump. I think that likely is manageable. And if you read carefully what the statement came from the Omani Foreign Ministry, essentially saying the Iranians and the Omanis have an agreement. That agreement now needs to be taken first to make sure that the regional states are okay with it, but what the Omanis have told me, they don't foresee a problem there, is that it will be taken to Washington. And from what the Omanis told me, again, lifting of the blockade was in the second step. And I'm a little bit skeptical about that. Again, it's the sequencing problem is still there.
First step is Iran lifting their blockade first, you mean? And then the Americans?
Yeah. Now, if the American demand is there has to be demining first, which I don't know how long that would take, but that is not an instantaneous thing, of course. I don't think this is going to work. But even if all of this is resolved, I think we still have a huge problem. Because imagine if the Iranians, the Omanis, and the American side come to an agreement, the rest of the GCC, there's going to be a lifting of the blockade, there's going to be an opening of the strait, whatever sequencing or minimal difference of time, all of that is resolved. I still don't see the Iranians lifting the strait unless Lebanon is included. Because otherwise, the Iranians are giving away their main leverage in order to get an MOU minus Lebanon. And I find that extremely unlikely. Yeah. So I think that part is still, to the best of my knowledge, unresolved, and the Omanis and others have not touched that at all. It's just been on the strait.
Just a heads up, Trita, just the tapping of the table.
Oh, sorry about that.
Loud on the mic. I know you're very angry, but it's okay. It's okay. We'll get out of this. How worried are you that will be the Trump? Because I was just speaking to Professor Pape, and he was talking about how historically it was a good discussion because he's given so many historical examples of where sanctions were like this. As soon as we started, I'm like, are you still worried about war? He's like, absolutely, because sanctions is probably the most obvious way to fall into the escalation trap. He said, "Is sanctions number one, and number two is an air campaign. These are the two ways, the two typical ways most escalation traps unfold." That didn't sound good, but so let me just ask you a question: how likely?
I can't put a finger on it, but first of all, I think Bob is absolutely right on that. Of course, he's done the research, and there's also research done by others that is even more specific, that shows that contrary to the belief that sanctions is some sort of alternative to war, if you listen to Besant, he said that this economic warfare, as he called it, will make sure that we don't need to take kinetic action. So he really presented it as an alternative to it. And that's been a common view in Washington, in which you oftentimes got doves to agree to sanctions because they were like, well, at least it's not war. Research shows that it's the opposite. Sanctions tend to be a stepping stone towards war, precisely because of the escalation trap. Once you have imposed it, then the other side needs to reciprocate, and then it ends up becoming a cycle, and we're already in it. And particularly mindful of the fact that, at least publicly, the US side did not put forward any demands on the Iranians. Listen to what Besant said. Read his FT op-ed. There were no demands. They were just saying, we're going to do this to punish the Islamic Republic. They're evil. It was all of this neocon talk. And the impression that will leave Tehran with is that, okay, this is an aim for regime change. And there's no way that the Iranians were going to back off. They're going to just counter-escalate.
I was going to ask you this. That's what Pape said. And he said that it's clear for him this is regime change. And he referenced a quote by Besant. He said he's telling Iranian soldiers to put their weapons down and reference the Berlin Wall. Pape made the good point that soldiers, he's saying soldiers. So Besant said, soldiers, you guys are not going to get your paychecks. But if everyone will lose their paychecks before the soldiers lose their paychecks, they're probably the only ones that will get the paychecks. But do you know,
there was a running joke at the State Department during the Iraq War that said that the last chicken sandwich in Baghdad will be eaten by Saddam Hussein. He can sanction the country and starve the population. The last person who will feel that pain is Saddam Hussein himself. There's something wrong with my camera.
No, I know what happened. No, I know what happened. Exactly. See, you just do this. I was going to tell you. So you think it is
so I still think,
objective?
Let me put it this way. I think right now the signaling I'm picking up is that Trump just doesn't want to do diplomacy. And he wants this off of his table for now. He's tired of it. And as a result, as you know, he instructed that there cannot be any direct contacts between the US and Iran side. I don't foresee that to continue for much longer. But bottom line is, when you don't put forward any demands and you do it this way, as Besant did, it's either regime change or you're just trying to play for time.
No, but
you're just trying to.
But there's no public demands. I'm sure there's a demand privately.
Um, I don't know. Let me put it that way. I don't know. I think there's been a situation has been created in which the president just doesn't believe that the Iranians will agree to anything, so he's stopping putting forward demands, etc. Again, it may change because nothing in this administration tends to last particularly long, and no policy seems to be lasting particularly long. And this is not even a policy; it's just a tactic. But I do think that we're in a situation in which the president is tired of this issue, and the options really were a debate between those who wanted military escalation and those who wanted economic escalation, economic warfare escalation. The diplomatic option was not really even in the debate this time around.
I want to ask you about the missile that was fired at the Emirates. I always like to ask you those conspiracy questions. But just before that, do you agree with me that if Iran accepts not to charge a fee in the Strait of Hormuz, or very minimal fee, or share the fee with the entire Gulf, concedes on the fees for the Strait of Hormuz in some way, Trump will just walk away and this is it? Would you agree that this is the core issue and it's not really regime?
No, I don't think it's the core issue. I don't think is the core issue. I do think it's an important issue. I don't think it's a core issue. It's, the fee, again, I think we talked about, the fee is an indication of who controls the strait. And this is where I think the administration has ended up becoming quite fixated on, that they don't want to have an outcome of this that has the symbolism or the substance of Iranian control over the strait. And the fee is essentially a manifestation of that. So whether it's a nominal fee or a symbolic fee, etc., I don't think is going to make a difference. It's the fact that there is some sort of a fee. Now, if it is shared with the other countries in the region, but as you said, look what Araghchi said at the interview that you referenced. This is very critical for the Iranians. They really want to establish the idea that there's only two countries that control the strait. The only two countries that have territorial waters in the strait. There is no international waters in the strait. It's just two territorial waters meeting each other. That's the Iranian interpretation. That essentially makes the Persian Gulf a landlocked, and not a landlocked, but it essentially closes it off for the other GCC countries, which, they will never accept that. So if the Omanis end up sharing their share of the fees with the rest of the GCC, the Iranians have no problem with. But they're not going to divide the fees between 6 countries or 7 countries.
Yes.
So I mean, we're getting involved in all these kind of idiotic stuff.
That's so crazy.
But it's so much about the symbolism of who's actually in control of the situation. So I can see the Iranians agreeing that, they take half of the share, and if Oman wants to share its share with the others, that's their thing. But not in a way in which it is objectively at the outset shared between them, because that would suggest that all of them are territorial water. All of them have territorial waters in the strait.
So it's the symbolism that matters. It's not the fee. The fee matters not for the fee itself, but for the symbolism of it. The missile. I'll ask you directly. I won't tell you what I think and know. Did Iran fire that missile at the UAE? What message were they sending? And was that the reason the UAE suddenly cut all trade with Iran?
I don't know who fired that missile, if it was the Iranians or not. What I think is interesting is, in most of these cases, this is not the same Iran as 8 years ago. There were those firings at Emirati ships, the firing at the Saudi oil fields, and all of it was done with the Iranians denying it and keeping their fingerprints off of it. And essentially having plausible deniability. Throughout most of this war, they've pursued the opposite approach. They wanted it to be known that it was them, and they took credit for it. This time, they're denying this one. I'm not saying that they haven't denied other things during this war that probably was done by them. So again, my point is, I don't know. But the idea that the firing of that missile suddenly brought the Emiratis to that position, I find that extremely difficult to believe. I think it's
days before the sanctions.
Yes. Also, it's very important to understand. Before this war started in February, between the June war and February, the Iranians had already moved their paying mechanisms away from the UAE. Then, of course, there's other trade.
Hong Kong or Turkey?
No idea. I mean, they have made it extremely opaque in order to
But
protect it.
when you invoice them, what bank do you put there?
I have no idea.
I had to make the joke.
So bottom line is, so when the Emiratis are coming and saying this, it doesn't seem to actually have much substance behind it, because the lion's share of the traffic that was financial traffic that was going through the strait had already been dissolved and been moved elsewhere. Moreover, we want to talk about conspiracy theories. Again, I don't have any evidence for it, but you've seen that royal airplanes, at least on 2 occasions now, have flown there, and rumors are flying around that would happen. And I have to say, I personally do find this one credible.
Me
The
too.
Emiratis paid off the Iranians billions of dollars.
Exactly. That's
Because
the logical thing to do,
nothing
though.
else explains why in the second round of this war, the Iranians didn't hit Emirates at all.
Yeah.
Nothing else explains that.
It's not suddenly, unless it's two scenarios. They're sending in billions, or suddenly the Emirates has a nuke. I don't think the Emirates has a nuke. And the only other explanation I can think of is this.
And if it has a nuke, then it questions the first part of the question, which is, did the Iranians shoot that missile?
Exactly. Yeah, that's an interesting one. I'm pretty confident that, and like from what I've been told, it's the Iranians fired that missile. I wasn't told why. I was trying to remember if I was told why. I don't know why. I don't know what happened behind the scenes. I would guess it's the Emiratis are the ones sneaking most of the VLCCs through the southern corridor. Remember the report that the Emiratis offered the Iraqis to also help them sneak out the ships. So I think it's the Emiratis that are, leading the campaign to get ships out of the Omani side.
Could be. I don't know
the
if that
Iranians
is enough of
sending
an
a warning.
issue. Yeah, it could be, but the bottom line is, if they wanted to stop it, this is not how to do it. If they wanted to stop it, they would shoot at far more of them, not just a warning shot.
Is it possible that the claim by Axios that maybe the Iranians don't have the capacity?
No.
I don't think that's true, but okay,
I don't find that credible.
They can
at
easily
all.
shoot the ships going through.
Look, there's a lot that is going on there that is not out there in the open. A lot of the oil that is coming out through that channel right now is Iranian oil. It is Iranian oil.
Through the
that is-
Omani channel.
Yeah, through the southern channel. They're selling their own oil through that waterway because it is shipped to other countries that are then shipping it within the GCC. So you have a new balance that is, and incidentally,
Jesus Christ.
some of the firings against the ships have been on the ships that carries Iranian oil. So
That
there's
is
shots
so bizarre.
fired designed not to create too much of an escalation.
So the
But
Emirates
just
fired
keep-
that missile at the Emirates then, based on this. This is
So, shots are being fired to retain a certain level of tension, but not a real escalation, and not really stop this, because the Iranians need this as well, because of the blockade of the blockade. The blockade of the blockade has created a necessity for some traffic to go through the southern channel, also for the Iranians. I mean, this is
the
an
Emiratis are working
entanglement.
with the Iranians to get the oil out so the Americans don't stop
It's-
it. That is crazy.
It's bizarre. But look, at the same time, you do have scenarios, perhaps not as convoluted as this one, created in war zones. I mean, remember all the stories of how Chechen warriors, while they were fighting the Russians, were also making a lot of money by selling vodka to the Russian soldiers. So you have these things happening in a lot of these different war zones. This one is just particularly convoluted, I think.
Well, anything interesting on your Substack that I should be on the lookout for? You always put out these
Well, I
crazy
had a
stories.
piece just a couple of days ago on exactly this, on the VLCCs and what the calculation of the U.S. side was, and why it suddenly, there's an exaggerated narrative out there in which they're saying, oh, we're getting 20 million barrels out, etc. I've seen no one being able to confirm that. But I do think that there is a combination of factors in which, thanks to a number of VLCCs, reduction of Chinese demand, the pipelines that go through Saudi and one of them that go through Emirates, there's been a bit of a balancing taking place that has put the United States in a situation in which it feels much more comfortable. If you take a look at gas prices in the US right now, it's pretty stable. It's much higher than it was before, but it's not fluctuating in the way that it was before. The problem that's going to come here, though, is more diesel fertilizers, etc., because those are the things that are not being pushed out in the same volumes through the Southern Channel at this point, and that's going to have secondary and third-rate effects here in the U.S. and elsewhere as well.
I agree. All right, man. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.